Hello, everyone. I'm Denise Howell, and you're about to listen to an episode of This Week in Law that talks all about social media and the law. We've got two experts on the social media and business front, JD Lasica and David Spark, joining me and Evan Brown. We're going to talk about email, social sites, and we're going to talk about net neutrality and copyright considerations as well. We'd love to have you join us next on This Week in Law.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiL.
Bandwidth for This Week in Law is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is TWiL, This Week in Law with Denise Howell, Episode 88, Social Studies. Hey, welcome back to This Week in Law. I'm Denise Howell, and we're here for a special Thanksgiving week edition of our show with two people who might be many lawyers' nemesis, though they are not lawyers themselves. And I'm really excited to have them on the show because we're going to talk about the intersection of social media and the law and lots of other things. So to kick that off for us, we've got JD Lasica. Hi, JD.
Morning, Denise. Some of my best friends are lawyers, so just for the record.
Yes, I know. And I'm one of those good friends, I hope. JD and I have known each other forever, and it's thrilling for me, JD, to be able to turn a camera on you for a change.
Okay.
It's good fun. Also joining us is David Spark from Spark Media Solutions. Hello, David.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Great
yes,
to
you
have you
don't
on.
have to lower third of me, davidspark.com, because that's a very antiquated site, actually. You can sparkmediasolutions.com or my blog, sparkminute.com. But thanks for having me.
Okay, we'll see if we can fix that while we carry on here.
No worries.
But thanks for letting folks know. And also joining us again is Evan Brown. Hi, Evan.
Hey, good morning. Happy Monday to you. Don't get to say that very often.
I know. It's good. Good to be able to start Turkey Week off with a bang here, as it were. Hopefully not any sort of culinary bangs. Wishing everybody nothing but good luck with their meal preparations later this week. Always a challenge. Always a challenge, too, is the intersection of social media and law, and whether or not it's an accurate or well-deserved kind of a status. Folks like JD and David, who consult a lot with businesses about incorporating social media into their long-term strategic plans, both internally and externally, often keep the lawyers who work for those businesses up late at night trying to figure out how to manage the programs that companies come up with and roll out through the hand-holding of folks like David and JD. So I wanted to get them on the show. And of course, folks will remember David from Tech TV in the good old days.
Mm-hmm.
It
even goes back to the ZDTV days.
That's right.
I take credit as I actually wrote the first half hour that ever appeared on the network, and I was the second voice that was ever heard on the network, too.
Oh, my goodness. That's a
yes.
wonderful stat. So I wanted to, first of all, jump into some of these things that you have written about, David, in your Spark, let's see, what is it? Spark Notes, which is...
Spark Notes is the name of the newsletter, correct.
Yes, and email newsletters have always kind of bugged me. Yours is wonderful. And it's not just because it's fun to read on an iPad, but yours is actually packed with great nuggets of information, wonderful bits of entertainment. I love the tweets that you pull out and highlight.
In fact, if people go, if they go to my blog right now, sparkminute.com, I will be pushing out in 90 minutes my next newsletter, and there are 3 very, very funny status updates that I found. Yeah, my feeling is if people just open my newsletter and they read the little factoids that I pull or the funny status updates, then that's fine. They don't need to actually click through the stories. But thank you.
But the stories are great, too. And you're often writing about business concerns that lawyers have to get themselves involved with too. And one of the things that you've done recently had to do with social media faux pas, communications faux pas in the workplace. And one thing I found fascinating about that was that you went around and you interviewed people and posted up a video about their favorite anecdotes of things that had gone wrong with workplace communications. And I thought it was really interesting that in this era of social media being the specter out there and the privacy risk and the confidential communications risk that everyone perceives it as, almost all of the stories that people gave you had to do with email. Is that just because social media penetration is still pretty low in businesses, or why do you think that is? Is email just hopelessly
I think
broken?
that there are critical problems still with email. Like one of the common things that people complained about with regards to a faux pas was the autocomplete feature. We almost all have it on enabled on our email, and that if you're sending an email to a David somebody and it didn't mean to go to a David Spark, everyone works so fast. It's an incredibly simple mistake to make, and that was one of the common things that came up. Yeah, I think, also because people see their email inbox as sort of their personal space, where they don't see their Twitter stream or their Facebook feed as much of a personal space as their inbox. And people get really insulted when you invade their personal space. Most common cases when, people get subscribed to an email newsletter without their consent, and people have complained to me on that. Although I make introductions with everybody that I attach to my newsletter, it's because there's something about that being a personal space, and that's sort of the highest space of violation.
Right. So to share with us some of the funny anecdotes that people shared with you.
Oh well, someone was dating someone in the office, but it was also the name of one of their clients as well, and they accidentally sent something that was somewhat pornographic to a client. That actually happened at an office where happened to one of my colleagues, actually.
I hate it when that happens.
But someone echoed the same story as well. The other story, which actually was not involved around email, which I thought was funny, was someone used a list of names and email addresses and Facebook contacts of women that they were auditioning for something, and used them as a dating list and started pursuing these women. I thought that was actually kind of a funny faux pas as well. Mostly, and also a lot of reply to alls. This was another common thing, like someone complaining, hey, who took my salmon out of the refrigerator, and it replied to everyone in the company, and it even went to the president, and the president responded, I didn't take your salmon from the refrigerator, so please don't include me on emails like this. The reply to all and autocomplete seem to be the major sort of source of most of the problems.
Evan, do you think that lawyers have figured this out at this point, or is it still just kind of a ticking bomb out there?
I'm sure that we, as lawyers, spend time thinking about it and have some trepidation at moment to moment when we're using these tools. I mean, with email, there certainly are all kinds of problems. Some of them would be specific to law firms. Sending something to an opposing counsel that you didn't intend to when you're trying to send it just to your client. Something I'm very mindful of is if I'm communicating confidentially with my here's how it works. If I'm communicating with opposing counsel, I will not CC or even BCC my client on that, because I don't want the client to mistakenly reply to me with the confidential communications and then it accidentally go to opposing counsel. I've seen that happen, to my opponents before, and it's something that you certainly want to take pity on them for. So I like what David said about the distinction between email being thought of as your personal inviolable space in a different sense than what there is with social media. It seems like the ability or the risk for bad things to happen on a social media platform are of a different nature than what they are with email. You may just kind of look silly, like posting something on somebody's wall when you meant to post it on your own wall. Or I guess that could be a little weird if you put something out as a public tweet when you intended to DM someone like that. So, but it just seems like the risk of I guess one way of saying it, you don't have quite as far to fall using a lot of the social media tools as what you do email. And lawyers, should figure this out and be cognizant of this because of the special, extra sensitive nature of the types of communications that we send and receive.
Let me just add one more thing to that is I wrote this other article called I could just unsubscribe from your mailing list, but I'd rather be a jackass. And really what it was about is the fact that people find the need when they are subscribed to a mailing list to not just hit the unsubscribe button, but to tell off the person that subscribed them to the mailing list because it's seen as a personal affront. And and I interviewed a bunch of people for which this has happened to them before. And people get very violent and very angry. I mean, that space, the email inbox, for some reason has become a sanctuary. Another case where a PR woman accidentally, CC'd instead of BCC'd an entire press list and bloggers, and these press lists and bloggers just decided to tell this woman off. A simple mistake, but that simple mistake caused such an affront to people's personal space.
Yeah, yeah.
Speaking of personal space, it looks like you're recording from your nursery there, David. Hopefully.
Yes, I am a new father, and I've turned the office into an office/nursery, and I don't recommend this for trying to get a lot of work done. So actually I have started to, I'm no longer working in the home office, so this is more or less my son Jack's room.
Well, we'll try and keep it down and not wake up Jack.
He's not here now. Don't worry.
Oh, he's not in that crib over your shoulder.
I keep expecting him to peek out.
Hey, we've all been there.
Banging on the bars. JD, when you're advising...
Denise, can I just add one quick thing?
Sure, absolutely.
For the non-lawyers who are watching this podcast, it might be interesting to point out that even though David is right in the sense that a lot of people do think that email is inviolate. When you enter that workplace, that email, if it's the company's email servers or if you're actually in the workplace, email is not your property. There have been all these cases in the Supreme Court around texting through like a policeman's cell phone. It was found that that officer could be disciplined for some personal texts that he sent through his cell phone. So there's a real disconnect today around these kinds of electronic communications about what people think, is rightfully theirs and what the law says.
Right. That's what I was going to ask you about, JD, is what do you tell clients when they come to you and maybe, they have been using email, as most companies have since the mid-90s, but they're rolling out some social media initiatives and they need help. They need to understand the differences in context. They need to understand where lines should be drawn and how they should be drawn without trampling all over people's expectations. Right. How do you manage all that?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting what's happening in a lot of companies today. One of our good friends, Shell Holtz, goes around sort of pulling his hair out because all these companies pretty much have, a lot of companies have this like no social media policy in the workplace. So employees aren't allowed to use Facebook. When they try to call up YouTube, they get a 404 message, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So the first thing that people like me and David do as social media strategists is we go into companies, sort of understand what their needs are, what the concerns are around privacy and confidential information. And we sit down with senior management. We talk to them about creating a social media policy. Sometimes companies, start off from the position of creating like a to-do list of do not do this, do not do this, do not do this. And what they ought to be doing is sort of figuring out how they can sort of leverage social media, all these amazing new platforms by empowering their users, their employees, to use it smartly. So we try to find a nice sort of even balance between those two kinds of opposing forces.
Okay, so here's something from our link list, which people can find at delicious.com/thisweekinlaw/88, our discussion points for the show. And it was posted by Venkat Balasubramani, who was on with us last Friday. And it has to do with CNN, who has obviously incorporated a lot of social media in what it is doing to reach the public. And they had a reporter, this is Read Web's reporter, Marshall Kirkpatrick.
Rick Sanchez was the CNN.
Yes, who asked about what happened to Rick Sanchez's Twitter account when he left CNN, because he had been blogging as a CNN person. It wasn't... it didn't look like there was necessarily CNN branding around his Twitter page, although there might have been. But it was really, the context of how he was tweeting. And I'm wondering, JD and David, how you encourage companies to think about their employees' social media activities and transitions in and out of their careers, which obviously the workplace is a pretty fluid environment these days. Does this come up in your discussions, JD?
Sure. This is actually a big common issue. There are two things that companies need to realize is that there's gold in every employee's social network. So the idea of, oh, let's hire that guy to do the social media for us is a misnomer on how this can work. You really have to enable it across the entire enterprise. So my personal network, your personal network, everybody who works at the company, all these people have to be engaged. Second is you need to have a brand for the organization as a whole. And some companies will just let that one person be the social media person. And then when they leave with their personal, accounts, then all the sort of social media goodwill you built up has fallen away. Luckily, most organizations are realizing that they need to have sort of some kind of a public brand. So that's why there is a Pepsi Twitter account, or I think it's PepsiCo is a Twitter account that they have, instead of just the individual people. And then you can set up multiple people to tweet from a specific account. The other thing you seriously need to consider is the fact that people come and go from organizations, and you need to keep these password information hidden. I believe, and I've not used it before, but I believe Objective Marketer does this, where you can set up your employees to actually log in to, sort of a social media front end so they can tweet and do other things from other accounts, but they actually never see the Twitter account password. So when those people leave, you just sort of shut down their specific account from Objective Marketer. And that's a really key thing you need to concern yourself when you're giving passwords away to your employees and they're coming and going all the time.
So that's great for the company, but not so great for someone like Rick Sanchez, who, was blogging as an individual in his capacity as a reporter, but wants to be able to keep his identity on Twitter when he leaves, and probably should be able to, but just shift context. Do you have any advice in that kind of situation,
well, I mean,
JD?
In most cases, unless it was just the CNN handle, he should be able to keep it. But the problem is, I believe the handle was Rick Sanchez CNN, and it's, as I understand, it's not so easy if you want to change it just to Rick Sanchez or Rick Sanchez something else. Without the CNN, since he's no longer there. But then again, there's nothing to stop me from creating a Twitter handle that says David Sparks CNN. I mean, they can't, they
Right.
may or may not be able to go after me unless I start slandering CNN in the process. So who knows, if he'll keep the CNN after, because he may lose followers as a result. I don't know what's built into Twitter to allow you to hold on to that as well. JD, any statement?
I'll add 2 cents there. I think it's a good object lesson in not including a brand in your Twitter account name or in your Facebook page. That you may not want to connect that closely with, because if you do leave the organization still has rights, copyright or trademark rights to that name. So Rick Sanchez is sort of in a rocky boat right now. He does, there are a lot of organizations that do tell their employees, hey, you're allowed to set up a personal account. if you're setting up an account that's where you're formally blogging or Twittering or Facebooking on behalf of the company, then, there are certain parameters, certain rights that we have as well to what you're saying as a representative of the company. So, it sometimes does make sense to have a personal account and a professional account with different kind of branding.
Yeah,
but I would also throw out that they talk about this with regards to Facebook, like how you can create different Facebook lists. And as Mark Zuckerberg showed before he, introduced groups, people, honest to God, do not think, oh, this is for this list, this is for this group. Such a small percentage of people actually do that and manage their sort of social network audience that hyper specifically. So it's a good idea in theory. It just never happens in practice.
Evan, do you think that companies are sufficiently dealing with these situations on the front end, or are putting out fires as they come up?
I think probably at this point putting out fires as they come up. And most of the analysis in this really just has to be in terms of pragmatism and what really is the right way to do that. And David and JD are both giving some great advice on how to do that and how to manage this from the kind of more of the human perspective rather than the legal perspective. Because when it comes to the legal issues in all of this, there really is not a whole lot to talk about other than the parameters of what the employment agreement says and what the arrangement between the employer and the employee is as to how the social media account will be used. So the discussion should be confined to that context, because when it comes to intellectual property or other stuff, it's really not a whole lot there. Take, for example, the copyright issue. Yes, this is an issue that's come up a number of times before. Are the tweets themselves copyrightable? So there could be something to be said, is the Twitter stream that the employee generates a copyrighted work that belongs to the employer? Well, maybe so. But you know what? Does it really matter? Tweets are the importance of most tweets is pretty ephemeral to begin with. So who cares who owns the copyright on a tweet that you put up just as recently as last September? From a trademark standpoint, I could see where it could come into it falling in the handle, the Twitter username. It's just like JD says, it's not a good idea to put the company name in a Twitter handle because for the employee's sake and also for the employer's sake, what's going to happen to that goodwill after the employee leaves? I've heard people talk about trade secrets. There was some litigation that settled up in Minnesota that provides some guidance on this. Really no guidance. It just kind of brings the issue to our consciousness of an employer suing someone, and this was actually over LinkedIn for connecting with people on LinkedIn. And so the suggestion is that the information as to who is connected with whom might have some kind of significant commercial value to rise to the level of trade secrets or being protected by some restrictive covenant. But with Twitter, how on earth could an employer say with a straight face that a list of followers is a trade secret, because that list is publicly available? It's not any kind of secret information that would give rise to being a trade secret. So it really, I think employers now are being more reactionary on all of this rather than taking a principled approach. At least, companies that I've dealt with and talked to, they are blinded really by a single statistic in all of this analysis, and that is how much productivity use of social media at work tends to zap. A management perspective might be, we've got 500 employees, and by gosh, last Friday there were 1,000 hits to Facebook from our server. Well, is that big of a deal? That's everybody accessing it twice. And it just depends on what kind of willingness you have in taking data like that. But the employer management side is just going to think that is outlandish, where somebody who is more enlightened and sees the positive benefits and the potential for use of social media that we've been talking about here, they're not accessing Facebook enough. My God, it ought to be 4,000 hits a day if you're really going to use these tools. So it's still out. We're still out there in the jungle.
Right.
Yeah, could I add something also there?
Sure.
I think what's kind of interesting and what I see at a lot of these conferences that I go to is that there's a sort of I hate to use the word generational shift, but certainly among the folks who are a little bit more savvy with these social media tools, they already have this kind of cultural framework that, of course, we're going to allow our employees to use Facebook and to be out there tweeting and that sort of thing. The kinds of things you see at companies like Zappos that have sort of built a reputation on genuine conversations with their customers. So what's kind of galling is the kind of hypocrisy that you see in a lot of these companies where they, first of all, they cut off the social media access to their employees, not allowing them to go on YouTube or Facebook. And on the other hand, they instruct their hiring managers to make sure you, in the hiring process, make sure you thoroughly vet these people so that even something that's really an innocent kind of, semi-innocent set of photographs on Facebook can come back to haunt people as far as whether they're ultimately hired at the workplace or not. So you're seeing that on a constant basis now. Where I think there was an article last week about some police officers that are now in the process of actually not, provoking the hiring of some new cadets because of some of the, kind of silly photographs that they're seeing on Facebook. And I think that's a real mistake where we're expecting every single, there was like an officer who said, if you post it on Facebook, it should be the sort of thing that you'd be willing to see in your morning newspaper. And that's completely, a jackass approach to how people sort of interact on these new platforms.
Right. And of course, you don't have control over what other people post about you. Finally, I've been on Facebook forever. Yeah. And a friend of mine recently took pictures at a party and tagged one with me with a drink in my hand. And that had never happened before. And I was like, ooh, I don't know if I'm comfortable with that. But, it's out there. Of course, I was dressed as Padme Amidala at the time, too. So that was a little bit strange. But, JD, I'm curious as to, you raise a really good point, and Zach Whitaker had a good post over on ZDNet about the future U.S. president's Facebook page is in existence now. We just don't, know who he or she is. And I don't think he's talking about someone like Sarah Palin, who's, managing as much as she can her image and, curating these things carefully with political goals in mind. We're talking about a kid who's growing up and doing what kids do online, and that someday all of that stuff is going to be subject to scrutiny. And I'm wondering, first, if you agree, and second, what you think that means for the future of us all.
Yeah, I've been hearing this discussion a lot, and I kind of think, number one, that as a culture that we will become increasingly forgiving of our past online social media sins. So the question really becomes, how big a sin is it? Are you dressing up in a Nazi reenactment and posting it on your Facebook page? Mm-hmm. That's probably beyond the pale. If you're out there, partying at poolside with some college buds, I think we're going to get to the point where if that kind of human side of yourself is not there on these social networks, people are going to start wondering, well, what's wrong with this guy?
But hold on. JD, look at it this way. We have the photos of George Bush, partying with his friends, and he wasn't on a social network. But it's amazing how someone will take a single photo and base an entire show around tearing it apart. So now with the social networks and all the video that's out there and all the images that are out there and all the articles and things that are written about you, about me, about any individual who later goes into public office, that, now this is just going to be more fodder for more content to be created on commentary, tearing that person apart or building them up, whatever way you want to do it. Because the news networks, of which there'll be far more, news and information out there than we even have today, because we've got tons as it is. but they will just be looking for more fodder, and this will just be more fuel to the fire. And I mean, it's just going to be more programming ultimately.
Yeah, I agree with that. And if Christine O'Donnell didn't appear on Bill Maher and just put those videos on YouTube, they would still appear in that public stream, right? So my point is that you're right, David, that there's going to be a lot more content available for hit pieces, for ammunition for these political consultants. And if you're thinking of going into political life, you've got to think about that before you make anything public, or if any of your friends are putting some stuff up around you. But as a culture and as a society, I think we have to increasingly sort of say, hey, this is on us too. You know, what kind of culture and society do we want to live in? And you know, I don't think it's the kind of culture where we don't have a sense of humor about things.
I don't know. People love to judge others and feel holier than thou. So I would love to believe that you're right, JD, but I think it's going to be more of the same, unfortunately.
All right.
Well, at least one jurist in the UK thinks that as the result of social media, we may be heading toward a culture and a society without a jury system that works at all in a practicable way. Let me get his title right. He has a very lofty title. The Lord Chief Justice, Lord Judge, published a lecture in the UK about his concerns about use of the internet and particularly social media by juries, which of course, I mean, as Evan and I have laughed before on the show, you get a story about this or two or three of them every week that some juror somewhere either posted something about the trial or accessed something they were not supposed to access, or, you know, live tweeted or what have you. There's just, you know, more opportunity for something to go wrong. Although, you know, the jury system has existed for hundreds and hundreds of years with various communications tools and news gathering resources available to the juries, and it's managed to withstand that onslaught. I'm just wondering, you know, is it really all that different now that people have cell phones that they can access on the courthouse steps, if not they're in the courtroom? Evan, what do you think about this? And you know, I'm sure the volume of mistrials has gone up in the last 3 or 4 years. It would be interesting to see statistics on that. Do you think we're headed for some sort of watershed event with the jury system?
It would be interesting to see some data on that. And, you know, based on my informal research on this, which is comprised of just kind of watching when stuff like this comes out, there definitely has been an uptick of reported decisions that involve jurors' use of social media and misconduct, and whether or not that means that that there should be a new trial on this. And I can't foresee a watershed event on this, but what I do see is that Lord Chief Justice's report on this, and I guess it was, you know, a pretty detailed tome that he released on this, he raised a point that I had not seen emphasized before, but it makes good sense, and I think it may give us an additional factor to emphasize when we're thinking of all this. What the quote that stood out to me when I was reading this here is that the misuse of the internet represents a threat to the jury system, which depends and rightly depends on evidence provided in court, which the defendant can hear and necessarily challenge. So he is couching this in terms of protection of the defendant. And what this did for me was think of this in terms of the importance of this as a protection against an erosion of due process. And I don't know that we as technology enthusiasts and social media enthusiasts have paid as much attention to that notion of it as we should have. I'm not going to suggest how you all have thought about this, but as for me, I think my analysis of this has been focused more on, why are we being so Luddite about this? Why are courts being so Luddite about this? Can't we realize that social media is everywhere and that people's mobile devices, you know, must go with them, and how unfair it is to deprive somebody of their access to the internet and all of that good stuff. But perhaps we shouldn't be so quick and dismissive in our thinking here if we love due process, which I trust that most of us do, because the evidentiary system in the Anglo-American system has been wrought in a cauldron, so to speak, over the centuries that preserves the integrity of the evidence that is introduced in the proceeding. And the use of social media like this is the biggest type of threat that we have seen over these centuries, and it does go to a very critical and essential part of all of this. So I don't know where there's going to be a watershed event on this. This does not seem like the issue to make it to the Supreme Court or something like that you might characterize as a watershed event in terms of jurisprudence. But it definitely is something that requires some careful thought, and like everything else that we spend time thinking and ruminating over, requires some good balancing of sensibilities to come up with a reasonable solution for all of this.
So, David, go ahead.
This is JD. I don't know if you watched The Good Wife this past week, but there was a really funny scene where the judge kind of went off on whether the defendants, because she was live tweeting from the courtroom when he specifically said Nazis, so she was locked up for a few days. I assume that what's happening with juries today, I haven't been on the jury for a while, but I'm assuming that at least after the trial is over, that all cell phones are banned from the deliberation room, because I can just see, a lot of examples where somebody would want to go in on Google and do a search, or go on their social network and sort of do additional research, when what the trial is all about is trying to create a crucible where only a certain amount of facts are coming to evidence, while social media is all around transparency and letting it all come in, and then letting the chips fall where they may. And that like Evan says, sort of goes against hundreds of years of jurisprudence. So we'll see what happens with that.
And incidentally, I just wrote about a case a few weeks ago where the jurors got on, or the foreperson of the jury got on his iPhone and he consulted Encarta. So go figure there. And isn't that the first?
By the way, I should also point out this is a problem for barroom trivia. The barroom trivia nights, they have to have this huge ban on no cell phone use, because they ask trivia questions and anybody in the room could just look up the answer. So it's kind of a, like in the courtroom, we're asking you, that everyone sort of agree that we're not going to use our cell phones here.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Hey, I'll ask this to David first. When you're working with companies on their social media issues, do the lawyers ever come to you and talk about discovery? Because this is something that scares lawyers to death, that setting things in stone, as it were, on the internet will come back to haunt them, and they'd rather just not say anything at all in a traditional sort of way, so that they're not leaving a paper trail, even if, what it sounds like at the time is that they're doing something wise and sage and helpful to the company, but you never know what is going to happen in the future. And yes, exactly.
So sadly, I almost never talk to lawyers through my business, and I should be. In fact, I spoke with a gentleman at Wells Fargo at the Enterprise 2.0 conference, and they have a thing called bringing an idea to the rack. So whenever they're thinking about adding a new service capability to the organization, they do something where they go, bring it to the rack, meaning let's bring every single organization within Wells Fargo that may be concerned with us doing this or creating this content or whatever it is, and find out today, before we even start, what are the issues. Because usually what happens is you start creating it, and then all of a sudden, the legal department goes, hey, wait a second, I didn't know we were doing this. Nobody told me. So bringing issues at the very beginning is always a good idea, but for all parties that be involved. Usually the issue, though, is, and I've talked with mostly it's financial firms, because they are the slowest, unfortunately, to get onto social media, but they are beholden to regulatory issues that you and I don't have to deal with. So they've got much, much greater concerns as to what is put out there. And as I understand, there is a dividing line between legal firms, or not legal, financial firms are allowed to give out information freely. It is advice that is heavily regulated. Now, yet people call them on the phone and ask them questions about a big, financial issue that's hitting papers right now, and they freely give that information on the phone. Why that can't just be put online because people are inevitably searching for it, I don't know. I guess it's just mainly their concern that how whatever is put online, is it seen as just factual information or is it advice that could be regulated?
Right. Well, one of my favorite things I've seen on the web in a long time is eBay live tweeting its earnings calls and the lawyers putting in the limitation that in the midst of the live tweets are the legal disclaimers, which of course cannot be reduced to 140 character chunks. So it becomes a series of tweets, and it's a very funny kind of mishmash that you have going on. But at least they are managing to leverage the platform and get the information out there in real time. JD, what were you going to add?
Well, I was going to say that the same thing is true. I work with some healthcare companies. Blue Shield of California is one of my clients. I was the social media guy for Assuring Plow before its merger with Merck. And you see the same kind of thing. Initially, hesitation about getting into any kind of social media because of the regulatory framework of violating the laws somewhere, some regulation somewhere along the line. And, so number one, I think the lawyers are more comfortable if they're going to be doing this, is, having a seat at the table, like David said, and talking with all of the different kind of stakeholders, whether you're on the communications team or marketing or, people sort of make the mistake that social media is sort of like just an outlet of the marketing department where you're just controlling a conversation or a message that comes out of one department when it really needs to sort of cut across all these kinds of divisions. So, legal needs to be part of that conversation at the table so that they understand what the issues are. What I'm seeing happening is kind of interesting in the healthcare space in the past year is that a lot of these companies are still kind of feeling that their hands are tied behind their back as far as the kinds of communications that they can have with their customers. So what they're doing instead is sort of they're jumping into other platforms. So patient communities online that are talking about medical help and, what are effective treatments and that sort of thing. People are very nervous about doing that on their own websites or on their own Twitter accounts. But if you're doing it on somebody else's, somehow they feel that they have more leeway to have the kind of honest give and take.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Along those lines, Facebook, of course, just revamped its messaging system. And it strikes me, I haven't played with it yet, and I haven't done much more than just sort of listen to the coverage about it. But it strikes me that combining the world of Facebook, which, we were kind of alluding earlier to the fact that those kinds of communications are perceived by everyone who uses them as more public, I think, than email. And email or more direct messaging. Do you think that, what do you think the impact of that is going to be, JD?
Well, it's hard to say, I haven't really seen exactly how they're going to roll this out. I think what's going to happen is kind of a slow evolutionary process where people who are sort of social media junkies who are on these platforms 24/7, who have a mobile device always on in their pockets all the time, are using some of these in kind of interesting ways, and they're communicating differently. I was at Web 2.0 Summit last week where Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook got on stage and saying, I think he's 26 or 27 now, and he said, he felt like an old fuddy-duddy when he starts talking to his teenagers about how they're communicating with other people. So, I think as these kids sort of move into the workplace, I kind of suspect that what's going to happen is that there's going to be a melding of this culture of wanting to communicate with people instantly, through that kind of IM or chat interface versus the email of asynchronous kind of communication where, don't bother me now, I'm actually trying to get some work done. So there's got to be some sort of balance again between those two kinds of impulses.
I'm glad you brought up Web 2.0 Summit. I put links to your 2 posts wrapping things up in our discussion points, JD, but could you just give us your quick takeaways for those of us who couldn't make it to San Francisco for the event?
Yeah, I really like going to Web 2.0 Summit. I think I've been there for 6 out of the last 7 years. It's one of the technology conferences that actually brings together thought leaders in the space. So they're not just talking about, how they made their latest $100 million, or, they're not talking about just the latest kind of trend. If you go to the Twitter conferences, they're always talking about the real-time web and how that's changing everything. They bring in people like Eric Schmidt of Google and Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook and Mark Pincus of Zynga, and they actually try to step back a little and go at 50,000 feet and talk about how what are the mega trends that are happening in the industry right now. And what's happening over the last couple of years especially is this move to the cloud, the idea that people are now building that people have these platforms to build their own businesses on top of. So you don't have to start from scratch. You can create an application layer on top of Facebook. You could do something on top of e-commerce through some easy to build tools. So the entire discussion of the 3 days was around whether or not the competitive framework is such that it's getting harder to become a new player in these spaces or not. So they labeled this Web 2.0 points of control. So there's a lot of discussion around whether it's too late to get into the game, into social gaming if your name isn't Zynga. Is it too late to get into geolocation if your name isn't Foursquare? So it was really good. It was kind of a nice step back and sort of to see where everybody's heads were at.
Great. I appreciate that update. I love that event. It would be wonderful to go again one of these years. David, I noticed you had gone to Streaming Media West recently. You want to bring us up to speed on any takeaways you have from there?
Streaming Media West, yes. I was there actually reporting for a content delivery network out of Texas called Ignite Technologies. Here's a very interesting legal issue that comes out of that, and it's actually a worldwide issue. Ignite has this product which will essentially push video to employees' desktops. So if you work for a 10,000 plus employee staff, you can force people to watch a video. So you got a message from the CEO, and you can force that video to go to the desktop. Well, here in the U.S., it's kind of kosher to put that software on employees' computers and then force them to watch it, because then they also have stats that show, that David Spark did or didn't watch something. So when it comes to disciplining me about whether I did a job right or wrong, you can see that I didn't watch the training video on whatever. Well, in Europe, that does not fly at all. You cannot pull that off, and the work councils out there in Europe don't like that. So they've actually turned that feature off, being able to tell whether somebody watched something or not, because they do distribution worldwide. So I just thought that was kind of a fun sort of legal twist, and how you have to manage it, because it differs country to country to country, and people who do worldwide communications and want to monitor what employees are or aren't doing, there's certain things that just aren't possible. But to get to your question about Streaming Media West, just in general, it's still a very, very difficult problem distributing video over the internet or within an organization. Most people, they come from one organization to another, and they just, who don't work in tech, just think that, hey, can't you just pull that video up because, hey, I go to YouTube and the video comes up. The problem is companies are trying to run other businesses, and video is not their core business. So tell you a perfect example. Kaiser, their core business is not distributing video, and making sure that their patient and employee records are all safe and sound and distributed well across the network is top priority. So if you're trying to do something that's loading the network, like video, you have to do it in a way that somehow does not disturb the crown jewels of the organization. So that became sort of a very, very hot topic at Streaming Media West this year.
Great. Well, thank you for that update. JD, of course, a few years back authored a wonderful book called Darknet. And so I love getting into those kinds of issues with you, JD. One interesting thing that happened recently along those lines, the war between Hollywood and file sharing, is there have been laws enacted and federal funding hinging upon compliance with various copyright standards through Congress. And we actually have had a university, this is over from Tech Dirt, Mike Masnick, Valdosta State University in Georgia, who is warning students now that they will face 5 years in jail as well as fines if they don't comply with the copyright policies of the institution. JD, what do you think of this? And do you think that more universities will follow suit?
Oh, throw them into jail. Throw away the key. I mean, come on. Aren't we be honest by now? I think a few years ago, it was perhaps understandable that music companies or media companies would sort of take this kind of hard-ass position and sort of use universities as their surrogates when policing it on campus. But I think, we've sort of come, at least in my opinion, I think we've come to a sort of cultural armistice in this race where, I think there's sort of an understanding that people who are, in their teenage years or early 20s, they don't have any money. They're all about experimentation. They're still developing their musical taste. They want to sort of try as many different kinds of samples, as many different kind of artists as possible. And, they can do it to some extent on some of these legitimate music services like Amazon or iTunes right now. But I think there's still just that impulse to share and to experiment and to see what's working for them. So I think it's a little bit nuts to sort of put that decree into the college regulatory framework. Because I think what's going to happen is once they graduate, once they get a job, once they start having money, and the music services out there are starting to become a little bit more user-friendly now so that you can actually go on and buy stuff and subscribe to Universal Jukebox. The conflict shouldn't be there anymore. People want their music, they want to experiment, and they're willing to pay for it at the right price point. And so let the marketplace do it. Don't do it in terms of regulation like that. Can I mention one quick thing that I forgot to mention about Web 2.0 Summit, and that is that there was almost no discussion of the law during 3 days, and it was kind of interesting. The only segment that really focused on legal issues came around when Julius Janikowski was on stage for 15 minutes talking about net neutrality. And it was kind of interesting that there was sort of like this undercurrent of tension between the FCC and Google when Google sort of threw a curveball at the FCC earlier this year by announcing an alliance with Verizon on net neutrality. And the way Eric Schmidt sort of explained it was that their starting position is that government regulation is bad. So that, Verizon and AT&T and all these carriers have been under this regulatory framework for 30 years. And as we're moving into this new mobile space, they want to make sure that they're not starting under that same kind of rock. So Google sort of came to Verizon's defense in a way and provided a fig leaf for them in carving out this new kinds of set of expectations of what's going to happen with net neutrality of creating an internet where there's more than one lane of traffic, where it becomes more like cable TV in some sense. That's not what the way Schmidt described it, but that's sort of what they're talking about. And you can sort of feel the tension in the air when Julius Janikowski came on stage, because there's an audience of businessmen, of startups, of entrepreneurs who sort of are always kind of skeptical of any kind of government regulation. But I think if you go out into the real world, into malls and shopping centers and I think there's a sense that, there's got to be somebody's looking for the protection of consumers, of regular people. And that's not always done in a free market context.
Right. Well, that goes right along with the fact that just this last week, Culture Minister Ed Vaizey in the UK has embraced the free market approach and has said that they do not want to have, or he personally does not want to see the UK enact net neutrality enforcement legislation, that he thinks that ISPs should be able to experiment with providing different levels of service and yet be transparent about it so that people can see what's going on, but, take a lightly regulated market-based approach toward traffic management. Evan, what do you think about this? Is this a dangerous model, or do you think that there is some way forward that actually could provide consumer protection in this kind of approach?
Well, as you know, I've expressed on here a number of times, a lack of the ability to just outright say that it would be bad if we had different channels through which bits could travel along the internet. And I'm just saying that because I don't know enough. It seems to be such a broad-ranging issue that affects so many people and so many different interests in all of this. I just don't know that it's safe to make, broad and sweeping declarations that, there shall in every instance be network neutrality, because in certain instances, I believe a smart person could articulate ways in which network neutrality could not be in the public interest. Mainly, those arguments would take shape of saying that it would somehow stifle innovation from those who have the money and the resources to actually innovate. I hope people aren't like throwing tomatoes at me through the web, but I just don't know. I'm not trying to advocate a certain position on all this. So what sounds good about what this guy in the UK is doing here is that it's kind of an intermediate step, and if it truly can be kind of a trial period or somehow just kind of dipping the toes into the water of regulating this in a certain way so that market forces have the appropriate amount of influence in all of this, that sounds like a great idea to me, because it's not so it's not so much painting with broad brushes in an area that by necessity is going to be quite nuanced and have a lot of little details to fill in that the market can appropriately address. So something like this sounds good to me.
I would also throw in, I think we kind of already have this. I mean, cable internet access, or cable, not internet access, cable TV access, the cable phone access. I mean, cable really is its own second internet, if you will. So, and they pay for, their proprietary, and I pay, to have my television and my phone to be as high quality as possible. So in a sense, we do have this already, and people have accepted it. To create a two-tiered system where similar services are on the same, are on the open internet and the cable internet, we'll see if that goes on. But in a sense, we have that now. We've got Hulu, and I've got regular cable. So we're seeing a merger of this happening already.
Good point.
As someone, David, who produces a lot of independent web video, aren't you concerned that your traffic might not be, or your material might not be as accessible in as nice a fashion? And do you feel like that should be the case?
Well, I mean, everyone wants to be on network television, right? Mm-hmm. I mean,
I don't know. Do they?
I know, but in a sense, you do. Right now, forget about that. I mean, I would love it if my videos got broadcasted on network television, because then that's a much higher distribution avenue than what I'm getting now, because that's, in a sense, forced distribution and prime placement to be in the first channels of a television versus one of the millions of sites out there. So that's always beneficial in general. So I'm already sort of wanting that and already losing out because I don't have that, in a sense. So if there was a two-tiered system where I don't see it being a situation of like, hey, David, do you want your video being seen on this system or that system? You have to pay for this system. I just don't see that kind of model coming up. I see it more of a cable or in like a Netflix model, that if I want to get movies or certain other stuff distributed to my television, I have to pay for that special access.
Denise, let me mention one last thing, and that is that I think most folks in the public sphere sort of don't think about these kinds of issues. If you ask people down the street what is net neutrality, they're not going to know what the answer is. They sort of assume that people are sort of acting on their behalf, with their best interests at heart, and they don't sort of understand some of the power struggles happening in Washington. There's a new website that I just came across that's kind of interesting for some of your viewers. It's I just did an interview this morning with the communications director of newmediarights.org. So if you go to my site, socialbright.org, you'll see our interview. And what they do is, anybody who has, if you're an online publisher, if you're a nonprofit, if you're an individual who's been hit by a DMCA takedown notice, if you have questions around intellectual property, what are you allowed to do online with copyrighted material, they have like a hotline that you can just call and get your legal questions answered. How often does that happen? Free legal advice, right? And we haven't really talked about Creative Commons at all in the last hour. I wanted to tell you about it really quickly about a project I'm working on called commonswire.org. We hope to launch it the first week of January. And basically, it's going to be an aggregation site of any kind of blog or content site or news site out there that releases any of its content under Creative Commons. We want to have like a one-stop shop where anybody can go and see all the Creative Commons articles that have been produced around different kinds of issues like law, like media, like business, and then be able to repurpose those and put those on your own blog. So the idea is just that there's got to be some sort of infrastructure where people can start using this material and not just, we're more than consumers today. And I think young people especially know that they're producers, they're designers, they're creators as well. And so here's content that you can use and remix and repurpose as you'd like.
That's great, JD. We'll go ahead and make that our resource of the week, knowing that that's coming online. Is it? I just tried to pull it up and it wasn't coming up quickly. That may be because Skype is using all my resources.
We're still building the thing, so we haven't gone public yet.
All right, good. Well, we'll keep an eye out for that. That sounds great. Sort of Flickr Creative Commons search for the whole web. How are you managing to technically bring everything in? Are you relying on open APIs? Are you relying on the metadata that's embedded in each Creative Commons license when it's incorporated? How does it work?
No, we're basically relying on the RSS feed. So we actually go through an old-fashioned spreadsheet by finding open content on the web and then just adding the feeds to them one at a time. Plus, using open APIs for Internet Archive videos, LinkedIn TV videos, that sort of thing. So it's a manual, painstaking process, going one by one.
Wow, that's going to be difficult, but good luck. It sounds like a great project. So getting back to privacy and location-based services, I'm wondering, getting back to Web 2.0 Summit, JD, you said that issues came up around net neutrality. Was nobody discussing the fact that the U.S. legislators are looking to revamp the whole privacy framework and possibly model more along the UK where things are much more stringent? Did that not come up?
Yeah, it came up in passing because, privacy is probably the issue that I think most people in the public are sort of concerned about when it comes to social media and Facebook. But it didn't come up directly. It only came up in the sense that most people, I think, in attendance, certainly those on stage, were talking about how, We're still really at very early stages of all this kind of stuff. Facebook is sort of making mistakes as they go along and course correcting as they need to, depending on the level of public outrage this week, right? I happen to agree with the Web 2.0 gurus at this point that it's too early for Congress to step in and set the rules when those kinds of cultural mores are still evolving. A few years ago, there was no Facebook or YouTube. There wasn't this whole culture of sharing media with each other. I think there wasn't even a culture of using your own name on the internet. Everybody had like a nickname, right? So in a very short time, like 2 or 3 years, we sort of Facebook has sort of pulled us along into this new kind of sharing dynamic. Not everybody is there yet. But they're doing the best they can in trying to understand what people's demands are and trying to balance those against, the basic nature and mission of the company itself, which is to, share as much media and material with each other's colleagues and friends as possible. So I don't know how you write a regulation or a set of laws around that right now.
Yeah, I agree. It's really difficult, and it probably is worth having considered analysis around. And yet, getting back to your point about consumers not understanding all this and yet needing some sort of layer of protection, I am concerned that there's a lot of both financial and physical danger that people might be getting themselves into, as well as just, our notions of what's right and wrong and what zones of privacy should exist around a person. Evan, this is a good footnote to our discussion.
We haven't mentioned the FTC, right? And that's probably the biggest thing that's happened in Washington in the past year when it comes to social media. The requirement now that if you're blogging on behalf of a company or you've got some sort of hidden agenda in your tweets, that you've got to disclose that. And I'm, I guess, in the minority of my peers when I say that that's a good thing. So while I think Congress would be a little bit out of their element and over their head and trying to figure out exactly what those parameters are, I think the very basic idea that there should be transparency around your motivations and your connections, I think that's a good thing.
Yep, I definitely agree on that front. Evan, did you see that we were talking about legal concerns around location-based services? Did you see Zach Whitaker's post about spoofing your location on Foursquare?
I did, and that is great. It reminded me of something I remember one of my professors in college told me. He was quoting some philosopher or some theologian back in the old days, and that ancient said that, given the choice between being able to appear in more than one place at the same time and the ability to levitate, he would choose the ability to appear in more than one place at the same time. And so just think of all those wonderful benefits. So this article here that Zach Whitaker wrote talked about this ability to tweak some settings using the the BlackBerry, the way that you can kind of operate the BlackBerry interface on the desktop, and to test apps and stuff like that to somehow spoof your geolocation so that you could appear continents away in your social stream while sitting comfortably at your home where everybody might think that you actually are. So this was certainly intriguing in as much as all the different ways that one could be creative in thinking of how to monkey with this and kind of mess with people, or to even be more nefarious and create an alibi for yourself. But I'm so glad that Zach wrote about this and that we have the chance to talk about it here, because it's a nice little example of how you can be innovative in your nefariousness, I guess.
Right. Talk about the darknet, JD. I think folks are more concerned these days about figuring out how to spoof their geolocation than they are about file sharing. Do you agree that the whole music trading thing has sort of gone by the wayside as we've gotten into a place where fewer and fewer people are really clamoring to get their music for free? Now there are more creative things to go do.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, I forgot to check in on Foursquare on This Week in Law this morning, so I'll have to go do that. You know what? I mean, I wrote Darknet not just about file sharing, but about how Hollywood and all these media companies need to sort of reinvent their business models to embrace the digital age. And we're sort of slowly, year by year, you know, I used to go down to Digital Hollywood every single year and sort of complain about how Hollywood needs, you know, still doesn't understand digital and the new kinds of and the digital appetite for and among young people, especially for how to consume media, right? But you know, they're slowly, you know, rolling out services regarding music. Other kinds of media, movies, and I think, yeah, I think you're right that the whole file sharing thing has not sort of, it's not front burner anymore since they stopped suing toward, it affects not just Hollywood, it affects almost every single sector about, you know, how do you negotiate a discussion with your cable companies. Today, it probably is not on the phone, it might be on Twitter. How do you create, you know, how do you create citizen journalism today?
JD, I was saying that I think most of that discussion, why it's gone by the wayside, is the fact that we have options now that we didn't have before. I mean, I've become a subscriber to mog.com, which is $5 a month for pretty much, you know, access to any music I want at any time on the desktop. If I want it on my mobile device, it would be $10 a month. If we had those options when, you know, Napster was breaking big back in '98, I think it'd be a different story. Agree? Disagree?
No, I agree. I agree completely. And I even said in the book that I think Napster did a service to music companies by giving them a kick in the pants, by making them understand, by shaking by the lapels and understanding that this is how people want to consume and interact with digital media today. So yeah, there's Rhapsody, there's Mog, there's all these new kinds of services. You know, it still kind of ticks me off that there's these kinds of regulations where I can't have my Bruce Springsteen radio station because you can't play more than 3 songs by the same artist in a row or you're violating federal law. So there's still a lot of silliness that's sort of, you know, caught up in these kinds of regulations that go back years and years and years to a different era. But you're right. I mean, these new kinds of media services, business models are emerging that sort of embrace these new realities.
Well, here's yet another business model and another end run around a barrier using technology, and that is e-marriages, riding to the aid of same-sex couples in states where marriage is banned. Apparently, Texas is such a place, and yet some folks from the lesbian and gay rights group have figured out a way to Skype in someone from Washington, D.C. to officiate marriages in Texas. So, I mean, I got married out of my own state, and I remember that was fine and perfectly legal, and I had to come back and get a license in my state, and they won't be able to do that in Texas, I take it. But, you know, at least they can have a legal marriage somewhere. So I thought that was interesting.
But would their marriage be recognized in the state of Texas? Even if they had this sort of virtual marriage?
Well, I mean, let's think about this. You're married in another state and you come back to your own state. If you want to be recognized as a married person in that state, I think you have to get a marriage license there. And if Texas won't.
So this whole, I mean, I don't see how this story is any different than me just traveling to D.C. and getting married over there.
Right.
You know,
well, I guess the point was the couple didn't want to travel. It was important for all their family to come. It was the first time some of their family could meet the people involved, and so they wanted to physically be there in their own home and yet have a legal marriage performed. So I guess they're legally married in the District of Columbia now, which
I
has
guess
got
so.
to make
But
them
also
happy on some level.
We've seen actually the flip of this happen multiple times where people have weddings and their family from overseas can't physically attend, so they Skype, the entire wedding ceremony, so the family overseas can actually watch the ceremony as well. So this is just kind of the flip of it. Like, I've got the family here, I just don't have the guy, marrying us, and we want him to be in a different state than where we are right now.
The only way we could really improve on this, Evan, is if we had a robot in D.C. performing the marriage ceremony.
That's right. And so far, I don't think anybody in the U.S. has given us that. But last May, we talked about that story of that couple in Japan that got married by a robot. So, that this would seem to even be more permissible than that, assuming that you can find all the same loopholes to jump through and ways to, articulate it so that it's gray and nebulous. If you've actually got a sentient, a truly indisputably sentient being on the other side of the Skype connection and, the ability to interact and be the efficient in whatever the states or the jurisdiction's law will permit. This seems to be a nice another example of that.
Absolutely.
I'll mention the fact that my sister-in-law got married the day before Prop 8 passed here in California to her longtime companion. One of the most interesting examples of social media, by the way, in the last couple of years, I don't know how many of your viewers know about the No on 8 wedding registry that was created by Equality California. So after Prop 8 passed, instead of everybody sort of moaning and lying down and waiting for, the next round of this fight that's going to happen in a couple of years, what they did was they created a wedding registry to raise funds for their cause. And so instead of, anybody, gay or straight, instead of asking their friends for another wine goblet or, a centerpiece or something like that, they said, instead, we're registered on Equality California. Come over to our site and, donate money on our behalf for this cause. And they raised over $1 million that way. So that's a really amazing by over 2,000 different couples straight. So that was a really amazing and inventive use of social media on behalf of a social cause, I thought.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's a great idea for any wedding registry if you really don't need more glassware and cutlery.
That's right.
So we already did our resource of the week, which is commonswire.org. Thank you so much, JD. We'll look forward to that. Our tip of the week is going to be making sure that journalists get your story correct, courtesy of David Spark. And the link to that is over on our Delicious page for the show. You did a great post with some fabulous tips on that, including how to deal with having the interview recorded, asking to review the piece before it's published, getting things repeated back that you just told them, so you're making sure that they're getting you accurately. More and more people are talking to the press about more and more things, and this is a wonderful bit of 5-minute media training. So thanks so much for that, David, and that's going to be our tip of the week.
And I will just quickly say that the big tip from this, if you don't even read the article, is don't ever ask a journalist to be able to review the piece beforehand, but you can ask to review the quotes. So that's the big dividing line. Don't ask to review the whole piece, but you can ask to review the quotes beforehand.
Wonderful tip. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us on this specially timed Thanksgiving week episode of This Week in Law. JD, it's wonderful to see you again. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, happy holidays to you and to all your viewers.
Thank you. And of course, both JD and David are part of socialmedia.biz, which is a blog and website where you can get in touch with them about their professional services. And you can follow JD at jdlasica.com on Twitter. So hope to see you again soon, JD. Say hi to your family.
Thanks a lot, Denise.
Okay. And David, great to see you again, too. I think we last bumped into each other at one of the Stanford summits. So,
Geez, I think it was a few years ago at the Always On conference, which, were really, really great conferences, and sadly they've been sliding downhill, unfortunately. I was unable to go to the last one, so I can't speak to the very last one, but they're traditionally really, really great conferences and superb speakers that are there. But thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it, being on your show.
My pleasure.
And thanks to all the viewers. Have a great Thanksgiving.
Thanks. You too. And folks, go follow David. He is DSpark on Twitter. And of course, Evan, have a wonderful turkey.
Yes, thank you. Same to you. This has been a fun show. Really, JD, it's been great talking with you. I've wanted to talk with you for a long time. David, great to meet you. So yeah, we ought to do this more often, don't you think?
I do. So hopefully one or both of you can come back same time or different times on an episode in the future. We generally record at 11 a.m. Pacific time on Fridays. And between shows, please go check out our Facebook page, facebook.com/thisweekinlaw, where we post up pre-show questions and get ready for our topics for the show. Really wonderful being here with you all this week, and have a very happy Thanksgiving. Take care, all.